But as to what gets done if a county doesn't comply, there's really nothing in the law, and it's not clear what the remedy is. So it's one of those places where the elections code just doesn't deal adequately with the issue. And I agree with Mr. Casson that a lot of this becomes very political very quickly. And it would be great to have some mechanism for dealing with these kinds of matters in a way that is that becomes just about what the law is rather than about what the politics is.
Why is the checksum not displayed when the software is downloaded into each voting machine? Okay, so that's a question. Let me just hook it up with this. Can the state of California sponsor the creation of a reliable, certifiable electronic voting machine using the many resources of the technology communities in California?
Well, let me just answer the first question by saying that the question about whether the machine should display a checksum that can be verified upon the download of the software is illustrative of the problem we have with transparency in elections. Because most normal human beings in the state of California would have no idea what that meant or why it was important. And there has to be a system that's easier for people to comprehend and trust than one that requires somebody who has 20 years of experience in the computer industry to know that it's working right. And the second question really goes to the same thing, which is can we, but I think we have to go beyond that. Part of the problem here is that we have proprietary software, and the problem isn't so much that it's privately owned, although some people have an issue with that. The problem is that it becomes a trade secret, and that I have reports that I got from the reviewers that I cannot release to you, the public, who depend on it, because it's a trade secret, and there are things in the reports about particular software that would, if released, have the impact of releasing a trade secret. And we just, I think, need to move toward voting systems where people who do have the expertise, and there are many people in the computer industry who spend many hours looking at software, and it is a huge tribute to the way in which a democracy can work, and where people who do have expertise spend the time to look at something. But if they don't have access to it, we don't get the benefit of that. So a starting point is to have computer code that is publicly available and publicly viewable. And there's still then issues about chain of custody. How do we know what is in any particular piece of equipment? And how do we know that nothing else is there? How do we know there's not an Easter egg or something else embedded in the software? And it's one of the reasons that I place such a heavy emphasis on auditing. It is impossible to know with 23,000 precincts what's happening in every single precinct and every single piece of equipment. But if we have a ballot that the voter marked and we have that original evidence of voter intent, and then we do audits that tell us when we need to go back to that, we actually can do a pretty good job. I think we can get to 99.9% certainty that we have accurate elections, but not unless we add the audits to whatever the system is. And it won't be the responsibility of one campaign or another to fundraise to pay for it. It's just automatic. There's a reconciliation process. If it's still within 1%, 0.5% at the end of that, another random 10% is counted and so forth. So we tried to concentrate the resources that are required to do a hand count on the races where we have the most likelihood of an error. And this is not a perfect model, and it's not a finished model, but to my knowledge, it's the first time in the country that anybody's brought together statisticians, elections officials, and the public to look at how we might set up a system that does tell us when there's a problem. The use audit, which is let's take a look at how election jurisdictions actually do with the requirements that we have. Do they actually put the security seals in the right places? Do they actually deliver equipment that's delivered in advance to a place that's secured? Do they actually have at least 2 people present in an observable forum when they're remaking a ballot that was ripped and therefore can't be counted? That's a different question than the question of auditing the results. Both are necessary to have elections where we can be certain that we have the correct results.
And before I let you off the hook, The
You put
second
me through
part.
an hour this afternoon.
I know. The first question included a question about the state of California. Can the state sponsor the creation of a reliable, certifiable electronic voting machine? We're talking about public versus private development of software.
Certainly the state could, but anything that the state does as a state requires an appropriation, a bureaucracy, and in a year with a $14 billion budget deficit, I am absolutely certain that the creation of a new voting system of any kind is not at the top of the list for most people. We're looking at cuts in education, law enforcement, in a whole range of things. That having been said, I think that there are efforts, and I certainly have been encouraging them to do a better job, and in a way that can harness the power of many people who are willing and have worked on many open source computer projects. It is the way that we got the software that many of us use as a web browser. Lots and lots of examples of where a collective development of software leads to a faster bug reduction and better public confidence. For the propeller heads who are here, let me just say one thing about the whole certification and bug process. There's a bit of a mismatch between the certification of voting systems and the natural development cycle of software, in that certification assumes that you will stop a voting system's development at a particular point in time and freeze it and not change it. And that worked fine when you were dealing with a mechanical system or even a punch card. Software is intended to be iterative, and it leaves us with the question of what would we do in the software development cycle if software was certified at this point and 5 weeks before an election we discover a problem or a bug or a security flaw that needs to be corrected. There's no mechanism for redoing the testing that rapidly, and it's not easy to do rapidly, as anybody who's ever downloaded a patch for one program and had it disable something else, or for me, it's routinely having Norton and Microsoft wage a fight, a massive fight of the titans on my PC that I have no stake in, but they're busy enabling this and disabling that until I have to boot one or the other and off my system completely in order to avoid, you know, a huge war. So we've got just a problem in how we think about that. And again, I come back to we have to audit. We have to audit. Whatever goes wrong in that cycle, whatever isn't perfect, if the voter marked the ballot and we have access to the ballot and our audit tells us when to go back to that original record, it becomes less important if we miss something, because we can always go back to the original record and figure out what was supposed to happen. And for those of you who aren't technical, I'm really sorry for them.
Propeller head was technical. Please discuss your thoughts and feelings about the instant runoff system.
You know, I think that there's a huge value to using instant runoff voting in certain situations in particular, and that where I would start if I were trying to move this is we've now got it successfully at the local level. And there are variations on it, single transferable vote, instant runoff, but the most obvious place for it to me is in a special election to replace when we need to fill a vacancy, where we just waste an enormous amount of time and money, and very often the runoff gets a turnout of 10% or less. So I think election administrators, what I've seen is that election administrators in California are much more interested in looking at instant runoff voting when they realize that they can avoid an entire congressional or a state, senate, or assembly election if they use this method. So we don't have, however, any certified software in California right now that can run an instant runoff voting election. So I am waiting. Right now we have vaporware. I have at least one vendor who is promising to submit the software for certification, but until we have certified software, it's not really viable to use it.